Hello and welcome to episode 76 of the TRUUMAN Podcast, the podcast designed to create a generation of self-defined men. Today, I'm joined by Steve Whittle. Steve, it's an absolute pleasure. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing great. I'm doing absolutely brilliant. So, thanks for having me on. Although you have just asked me how I'm doing, and I said absolutely great, and we've just had a conversation off camera about how I've been a little bit low today because I've had to respond to some difficult emails about suicide, about people who've been bereaved by suicide, and so that's been quite challenging. So, in what we're trying to achieve by getting more men to open up, let's start with that and say about a challenging day, but actually I'm doing okay.
Yeah, I was going to mention it, but also I think there is the sort of trigger warning for this episode. I guess I think we're going to go into sort of deeper and darker sides of this, but I'm still looking forward to it nonetheless. As you say, it's something that needs to be spoken about. But first, and as always, Steve, in your own words, what makes you a man?
Well, I've been thinking about this question and a lot about what it is to be a man, and we have those traditional aspects of what most men should be, strong and stoic, a provider, a leader, all of those things, and which sits nicely with what we are physically. We are physically stronger. We tend to have more endurance, and we tend to do those kind of roles that are physically demanding and dangerous. But I guess for me to be a man is to be able to be all of those things and more. And the more, I guess, is to be less silent. So for me to be a man is to be a good role model. And being a great role model means that I have to be, that I can be strong and can be stoic, can be all of those things, not ashamed of those things, but also open and honest about things that I am dealing with, and be available to getting support that I might need. So it's kind of like to be a modern man, I guess, is to have that extension that you have to masculinity.
Okay, great. I will get into that a little bit more because there's some interesting things on that. I guess the and more. Um, do you feel that that creates more pressure for men, or do you think that it's now just a case of as the way society is, and more is needed and expected?
Gosh, that's a great question. So I think there's always pressure on men, no matter what. So and pressure is relative to the individual as they go along. But I do think there is added societal pressure at the moment when talking to men to say you need to talk more. And then, but what you're doing there is you're asking them to do something that they've often not been brought up to do. So it's not in their repertoire of skill sets, if you like, to have better emotional intelligence, better awareness of how they are feeling with their mental health or their physical health. They don't talk about those things. It's not a language that we're used to using. So when we're told just to talk more, that does put more pressure on most men. And often it's better to, rather than dip their toe in the water of engaging about the things that are going on in their lives, they would choose not to. It's like it's cognitive dissonance, isn't it? They know that they should talk more. Society's telling them they should talk more, but actually they would rather be silent than have that fear of weak, being perceived as being weak or demonstrating vulnerability. So I think it does add pressure if we don't create better spaces or a better understanding of what it is to speak more.
Great. I think that leads on perfectly to explain a little bit more why you're here and what it is that you do in the space.
Well, I'm the founder of a charity called Tough to Talk, and Tough to Talk's goal is to reduce male suicide and destroy the stigma around the factors that lead to thoughts of suicide. And when we created the charity, we waited a while before announcing us on the block because we wanted to make sure that we positioned ourselves in the best place. So, for example, we have lots of services out there that support men who are struggling with thoughts of suicide and factors that lead to those. If you look at your primary care, your secondary care, and the third sector, great peer support networks and things like Andy's Man Club, all of these places where men could go. But what we're noticing is the majority of men who need support don't go. They don't go through open door policies. They don't go into safe spaces, peer support networks. So we understand why that's happening. And so we didn't want to create another place where the men we want to help are not going to go. We didn't want to go into politics, and we didn't want to try and change policy because I haven't got the heart for it, all the finances. So what we decided to do was we tried to create an organization, a charity that would work with male-centric spaces to be able to connect with their men better. So all space is good for men, or organizations who are dealing with vulnerable men and provide the right content and the right training and help change cultures in their spaces, by getting the role models in those spaces to have a better understanding of these issues, to be able to lead better, and to make it okay for all men in those spaces to be able to talk about the things that are going on. So more of those men will end up going to Andy's Man Club or to the GP or wherever they need to go. So it's that real culture shift is what we're trying to do.
Where do you think these men are that need the help but don't seek it? You mentioned all these groups that exist and that they have popularity and it's growing, right? But where do you think who are these men that sit on the fringes of all this support that don't seek it?
Yeah. So, we always talk about most men, and we believe that it's about 80% of men who die by suicide are functioning adults. So they have jobs, have friends, have family. And when they die, we often say things like, I didn't see that coming. Or we say things like, well, I knew he was struggling with this, but I didn't know it was that bad. And the majority of these men, and bear in mind, they're not all here. They are scattered, through the workforce and workspaces anywhere. But the majority of the men that we are really concerned about are those men who are in real tough, high demanding roles, like physically demanding, endurance-based roles that are often dangerous, So places like manufacturing, construction, infrastructure, the guys who are down the sewers, the people looking after our electric and our water, and all these all those sort of places. In sports, of course, we mustn't forget our youth development as well. So the men, overall are everywhere, but the majority of the men who are struggling in these very male-centric spaces where there is a stigma around men speaking up, even I hate this phrase, but even a level of toxicity around being able to show vulnerability. So that's where we focus most of our efforts.
So one of the first things that I ever noticed when I was sort of going through my journey was I lived in a block of flats, and it was in Manchester. And if you know Manchester, it's continuously being built. And one of the first thoughts that sort of came to me was I looked out of my window and across to a crane driver, and he obviously was carrying some big 2.5 ton plus cement block, putting it into place. And the thought that crossed my mind was there's nowhere in that day where he can say, I don't feel okay today, because at the end of the day, he's moving a large object over probably 8 to 10 other people. And if I was one of those 8 to 10 people and the guy went, I'm not feeling great today, I'd be like, you know what, Dave, I'm not going to stand under the crane today. So I totally get the concept of that. So where and how do you find that balance of allowing them to open up, but also, like you say earlier, that weakness or that vulnerability it's quite scary. It's almost like, is there a job threat to it? There's so many nuances to it. But yeah, how do you get them to do it?
Yeah, and you're right, and it does highlight a load of things there. So one of the things is the factors that lead to thoughts of suicide. So for that man in the crane, he could have a very lonely existence, and so we know that often we talk about mental health as an umbrella term, and that's often where most men switch off. But then if you started talking about the real factors, so the loneliness in that crane driver, so it could be loneliness, could be addiction, gambling, separation from family, all of these things that men are really worried about but are not talking about. Those issues really need to be spoken about. So how do we get to these people and talk about those things? Well, it means that those spaces that they're in. So big shout out to Balfour BT Vinci, who we work with. We go to them in their toolbox talks. We meet them in their meetings when they're all together, and we we do it, and it comes from the top down. So we know that the COO and the CEO of the company knows that this is happening. The head of occupational health is there, and he's saying this is important. We should be talking about these things, and we deliver content, awareness, and talks on these things to everybody who's in the room. And what we find is that everyone hears this message, and they will still carry on with their banter and their jokes and everything else that's happening. But because they all know they're all in it together, and the message has been delivered together, and we are handpicking male leaders in those spaces to carry on this message in their spaces, they know that it's a real thing. It's not lip service. We're not just ticking a box. We mean this, and it is going to happen. And we know that we've had amazing success with Balfour Beatty. I mean, when we launched the campaign with them, we did 50 awareness talks in 10 days to 2,500 men. And in that 10 days alone, we had 10 men come forward who were having crises that could have led to thoughts of suicide. We had 2 people who were having thoughts of suicide, and 4 people who were worried about colleagues. So we know that when they know it's okay, and they're confident that there's going to be no backlash, they can get the help they need. And those lads did get the help they need, and we know there's been a ripple effect from that, because as they've been seen to get the help they need, others have now joined them to get the help that they need. And that's how you do it. You start to change cultures.
Do you think that these men are more engaged with the idea of getting better, or are they more engaged with the idea of moving away from even considering those thoughts, like almost carrot stick? I find it quite an interesting space, as like where do we push men? How do we move men away from those thoughts?
I don't think they think like that. I don't think most men think like that. I think most men believe that everything that happens to them is a problem that they have to solve. So, for example, when we hear men who have their partners left them and maybe taken the children, and we say, "Listen, this is really tough. You must feel awful." They go, "I don't feel anything. What I know is I've got to fix this problem. I've got to get my wife back, or I've got to find a solution to be able to still be an amazing dad." So actually, most men are seeing everything as a problem they need to solve. And so when we talk to them, their mindsets are still, if I speak to you, you will help me find a solution to fix this problem. So I still believe today there's still not a great awareness of emotional intelligence or mental health issues, or how they feel about things.
I guess from that it is more towards the bettering. So like, how do I get out of this? Not it's there. So
how do I fix this? How do I make this right? Yeah, how do I move away from that?
And I guess those sort of hands-on jobs where they are fixing stuff all the time, it's even more prevalent, right? It's just a case of like, here's a problem, I've got to fix it. And I do agree. I do think a lot of men feel that way, and they feel that they need to solve things. So let's look at the other side of it, which is that emotional intelligence. So once we've sort of broken that gap and broken that barrier, how do we start to build on top of that, to start digging a bit deeper, shall we say, to find the root cause of potential harm?
So I understand your question, right? So so how do we move men away from just thinking I've just got a problem to fix, but how do I feel about that, and how do I build resilience to those things? Well, I guess that'll again become from more interaction. So the more interaction that men have with each other using this kind of language, the more normal it will become to have those. It's a real sad state of affairs that I can't remember the name of the study, but there's a study out there that was done on young boys, asking them to identify how many feelings they knew. And off the top of their head, they could come up with 3. And it was happy, sad, and angry. And then when you asked them to talk about more feelings they might have, they really started to struggle. Even identifying emojis, they struggled to identify what emotion was with each emoji. And it's just a lot of language that we use. So I guess to bring up emotional intelligence, then we have to start introducing that language with men in everyday walks of life, but not in a way that wouldn't appeal to them. So it has to be marketed in the right way. We do have a marketing problem when we're talking to men about anything to do with emotion and good mental health. We we tend to switch off when we read those things. So we have to be able to market it differently. We do a lot of work in that space. But yeah, I guess it starts with, I guess it'd be great if we started that with young people, young men in schools, in colleges. I remember when I was at school that we used to have a lesson every week on social studies, and we used to talk a lot about that stuff. And I now know that it doesn't happen in schools. In most schools, they don't have these kind of things where they sit around and talk about those kind of things. But what happens is if they did have that and they went into the workforce, they wouldn't have it. And it might even be frowned upon to talk like that. So we have to get into these spaces and help them understand these better. And role modeling is an amazing way of doing that.
For sure. To touch on the sort of marketing side of things, when you said that question, I was like, those were the first three that popped into my head, and then I eventually got some more. But it's still funny that that's as far as I could go. I've recently done some stuff with the emotion wheel, where you sort of like then expand it out and see what else you're doing. But that for me is just because I'm trying to be in this space and I want to understand it more. Like if you give that to another bloke, he's just going to be like, "What is this? Like I'm not even going to entertain this conversation."
Yeah.
So let's sort of touch on that side of things, which is the marketing side. We are weirdly loyal men when we come to those things. So whether it's the car that we drive or the razor that we use or the beer that we drink, it's pretty much within a set boundary. So once you've got us, we're customers for life. But it seems very hard to get a man to change his thought process. Firstly, why do you think that is? And secondly, how do you help with that?
Okay, I think the biggest reason is that the man hasn't found their why. Why should I do that? They know why they drive that car because it makes them feel a certain way, right? When they drive that car, they have an emotional response to choosing that car and driving that car, right? When they buy that razor, they know why they use it is because the majority of the time it's giving them 100% the right service. They've maybe not cut themselves on it, so they will always do that. So they understand why they need to do those things. When you put a poster up, for example, in most companies I go into, there's often a poster up there about saying, "We've got your back. Your mental health's really important to us. Here's an EAP number. Phone this number." And most of us, men and women, we won't understand. Why would I phone them to get the help they need? I already have my friends. I already have my family. I already have. I'm already doing okay on my own. My need to phone that, you may remember cognitive dissonance again. My reason to phone that number is probably less important to me than my need to remain strong and stoic and silent. So we have to give men especially a real reason to have to do that. And in the marketing, when we're talking about that, is you have to dig under the surface of mental health to the real reasons why men are not working. So I'll give you an example of where this has worked for us. We were working with an organization who identified through talking to some men that the biggest problem they had in their construction company was separation from family, loneliness, and financial issues. So we looked at their marketing, and their marketing doesn't mention any of that. So we trialed, and we knew that only 2% of the men were actually taking up the EAP services to get help. And so we said, well, let's measure it. Let's trial something. So we started a campaign where leaders, not leaders by title, but leaders by who they are in the company and the respect they get from other men, posted a video blog. There was video content, and then there was specific posters on the back of toilet doors with a QR code, because they're the best place to put the QR codes. Because if a man is embarrassed to scan a QR code, he's not going to do it in front of the urinals, but he might do it behind closed doors in the toilet, right? And we simply made it super simple for men to understand, right? Problems with finances, we've got your back, free number, confidential, and then bullet points of the reasons why they might be having trouble with finances. Phone this number, we've got your back, right? And within 60 days, the EAP numbers percentages doubled. because we spoke their language and detailed a particular problem that they may be having. So that's one of the reasons. What we've got to do is we've got to give more men their reason why to do something. Let's fix the actual issues that they're having.
Do you think so? Do you think that those sort of marketing messages are just too generic? Are they just sort of aimed at everyone, or are they aimed at women? We have conversations around mental health not being for men, and it's sort of been positioned as that it's for women, and the way that it's sort of done is not right. Is that just the case? That is a bit of a brush approach, and there's not been this thought out.
One of the problems we have is it is very generic, and we know that a lot of men don't receive the same message that a lot of women receive. So I'll give you an example. The phrase "it's okay not to be okay." When most women hear that, they have a greater understanding that this is going to be followed up by an arm around the shoulder, a WhatsApp group's getting set up, we're having some wine, we're going to fix this problem. When most men hear this phrase, "it's okay not to be okay," then they go, well, fine then, because I'm not okay. And if it's okay just not to be okay, then that's absolutely fine. So we have to be more action orientated with our messaging. So why can't we change it to, "it's okay not to be okay, take action. By the way, this is how you can take action," right? Yeah. So that's a great way of doing it. Now, without the fear of getting cancelled, I'm going to say something quite controversial here, right? Is that most of the people who are providing the content to support men are women. You only have to look at most HR teams are women, most marketing teams are women. And when they get together and they go, "Do you know what? We need to help men more." You go, "That's fantastic. We need more help." They will then create content. And no one is feeding back to them. No one is talking to them and saying, "Hey, do you know what? That's a great piece of content. However, I don't think it works right for men." And an example would be go to our website, unashamed plug. But our website we've looked at the science behind colors, tone of voice, language, action-orientated content. And that's how we've written our website to appeal to most men. And so if no one's feeding back to people who are providing the content and saying it's not working right, we often see that it's often very bright, for want of a better phrase, fluffy colors. The messaging is incredibly vague. It's not action orientated, often way too long. So it's too long to read. Most men won't read it. And sometimes the imagery is quite poor. So I'll give you another example. We worked with Q Branch to support Kenton Medway's Talking Services to redesign their posters. And they had a poster of a man on the back of it getting help. And it seems obvious when you talk about it, but the person who was giving the help had a clipboard and a pen. So they were saying, "So I'm going to take everything you say down," right? And that is not appealing to most men. I don't want you just to listen to all the things I've got. Just give me the solutions. And I mean, they'll openly admit they made a mistake with the front cover picture, which is a picture of a woman. Now we're aiming this at men. So sometimes it can be really obvious, but other times it can be less obvious about getting the message across to men when marketing to them.
Those subtleties, those nuances that just trigger in men's brains, that deep-rooted problem solver, if there's no call to action. I remember seeing the Samaritans one at the train station, which is like, "Gary, we're here to talk," or it's along those lines. And obviously the Samaritans is a fantastic organization and amazing. But I always remember reading that and going, I feel like that's missed the nail completely. I think it's missed the mark. One, there's not many Garys anymore. That was my first sort of thought process. So like you're really pushing it to a niche group of people. And then secondly was just like, okay, like what do I like? There's a number here. Like, what am I talking about? Like, no one actually wants to talk to me. I'm quite a lonely bloke. Like, it's almost like I imagine a cheesy sex line on the back of a lads mag, not having too dissimilar sort of copy, if you get what I mean. It was sort of, yeah. So that action side of things is really interesting and obviously really important for men. Do you think that will change, or do you think that's just what needs to change?
I think it needs to change. We know that in the organisations that we've worked with who have changed it, they've had a much better response to everything that they're doing. So it makes absolute sense. But it can't just be a poster on a toilet door. For it to be okay for those men to find their why and be inspired to phone that number and get the support they need, or speak to somebody within the organisation, or phone one of these helplines outside of work. It needs to be okay for it to be for that to be done. There needs to be a culture shift in those male-centric spaces. To have to have better role models and have men who are really comfortable with their identity of what it is to be a man. And to be a man, and it's okay to be vulnerable, to be sad, to be those things. Yeah, I heard this amazing story. I wish it was something to do with us, right? But it wasn't ours. But there was a foreman on a job site, and he went to every induction of every new person who joined the business. And he's this big burly man, and he would come in and he would say, "Listen, I've only got one thing to talk to you about, and that is how you're feeling on any given day. And if you're feeling anything 6 and below, I need to know, because we're going to get you up to a 7, because how you feel, okay, is going to affect how everybody else is working, how you're going to be working, how well you're going to be." And he would walk around the job site and he would say, "What's your number today?" And they would tell him. And it became such a big thing, such a something that they all knew, that they started asking him what his number was before he'd even got to them. And it became this ingrained culture shift that it's not okay for you to just turn up, put your hard hat on, put your steel toe caps on. You have to be present. And so he single-handedly started getting men to think about how they're feeling and starting to change shifts in that emotional intelligence amongst these men. And that's great leadership.
It's really interesting when you say the word, when you mention just not turning up and doing that. A lot of men in all professions there seems to be an element of that. You sort of look at the monotony of going to the office. Maybe now it's less, and then coming home and just sort of going through the motions and sort of like counting down the days. Really is just like, I'm just constantly on this wheel. All I have to do is turn up, do my job, get paid. That goes into the family. I've done my job, and that is the end of everything for me. And everyone in my family will respect me, and I'll be fine.
Yeah.
You then touch on all the other things that might happen: divorce, illness, etc., that can affect men. What's your thoughts on stuff outside of work and life, and like, as I like to coin it, like just being more selfish?
Yeah. So we know that men who are part of communities often thrive rather than just survive. So, back in the day when we used to have church and we had working men's clubs and things like that, men that obviously went to those groups used to vent and get it off their chest. So we know that men in those groups do better. Those people who have hobbies and close networks. But what we know is that male friendship is on the decline.
Yeah.
It's been on the decline for a very long time. It's not very good. The amount of men I know who have only got friends because they are the husbands and boyfriends of their wives and girlfriends, right? And they haven't really built great bonds with people. So we know that actually outside of work, that selfishness is to have that close bond with their friends. And so I know that we don't do much work outside of workspace, but what we're hoping will happen is that if we can change cultures in that workspaces, those men will go out and reflect on their own lives and say, well, what is this like for my son? What's this like for my friends? And we know it's working because I get messages from people who said, listen, that talk you did, the training you did was really good, but I've now it was somebody I know from my friendship group who actually I noticed something and I went and spoke to them. Now we're in regular dialogue about these things, and he's got a closer bond to that person. So I think being selfish outside of work is really important. You have to find, there's an old phrase, isn't it? Your vibe is your tribe, right? Yeah. You have to find your tribe, and then your vibe will be so much better.
I can't agree more with the ripple effects. So I personally went through a battle with my mental health, and then started a podcast. So I started talking about it. As I've talked more and more about it online, in person. My friends that I've known since school and those sort of things have started to open up and have these sort of conversations. Now, don't get me wrong, they're not like deep, emotional, let's sort of really unpack something here, but it's more than talking about the football or asking whose round it is. Like it is actual genuine connection, and I'm really grateful for it because it's really strengthened those relationships for sure. So if anyone's listening or anyone who's ever been on a talk of yours that thinks I'm not going to do it, I would 100% recommend just trying it, because if you're open, they're more likely to be open as well.
I agree, and I would never, never, ever underestimate the power you have by asking somebody if they're okay and genuinely mean it, not just how are you doing, which is really just hello. I
Yeah.
mean, genuinely saying, listen, I've noticed that you've been a little bit down recently. How are you doing? And if that person, even at that point, still says, I know I've been a bit down, but I'm okay. I've got this, right? That the power that you've had by showing somebody that you care, and that person might walk away not speaking to you at that moment, but might be at their rock bottom and just thinks no one cares, and all of a sudden you have shown somebody that you care, and that might just knock them 1 degree off the path that they were going down, to make them think that actually maybe things are okay and people do care. And so that those little moments in men's groups, just doing that is invaluable.
100%. I couldn't agree more. I think it's really powerful. I guess the other side of that, and maybe something that you may have experience with, is active listening and men being able to listen. And because we're innate problem solvers, right? So if someone goes, "Oh, the wife's bugging me," right? Have you tried this? Like, we're straight in there with a solution. So have you got any advice or any sort of tips for sort of active listening if someone does say
Yeah.
something more
Oh
than
my gosh. The hardest part is to get someone to speak up in the first place. So if you've got somebody's attention and they are speaking to you, you give them your full attention. And if they are talking, say nothing. Just listen. And when you're talking about active listening is a skill that needs to be learned. And so with active listening, nodding at the right time, paying attention to them, phone is out the way, nothing is distracting you, right? Go somewhere quiet if you need to, and when they say something that's really relevant or really strong, the things that you sort of chip in with are not anecdotes or your own experience or solve the problem, but reassure them what they have said is right. And if they tell you something awful, say to them, "You're right. That is awful. What you've gone through is terrible. Tell me more." Reassure them that they're okay to continue in this conversation, in this path. Okay. And at the end of it, in whatever way you need to do it, when this is all out, say, what are you going to do to fix it?
put the solution back on them, make them
Yeah,
come up with it.
absolutely. And if they don't know the answer, then you can come up with stuff. You have people who may be, who may have all the answers, and they just needed to be reassured that they were the right things to do. But then you have some people who are just a complete blank. They're just like, I'm at my wit's end. I don't know what to do. Then you can start talking about maybe things that have worked for you, or maybe things that might work, and then help them come up with a plan to do that. But the most important thing is what happens after the conversation. First of all, don't break their confidence. You can only do it once, and check in with them. Show them that you still care, that they were right to speak to you. That's really important.
Awesome. I think there's some really valuable stuff in there for sure. I really want to touch on some of the other, let's say, I guess, lesser extremes of what can happen with sort of poor mental health. Touch on finances, and we touch of like just turning up as like things, and ways that those are sort of numbed or seen as solutions are sort of gambling and drinking. In your experience, what sort of conversations can be had, or what conversations need to be had around sort of these other activities that are self-destructive, really?
Yeah. So we talk a lot about what do you see, hear, and know about the people who are around you, and it's like having alarm bells go off in your head. If you hear, see, or know something about somebody that you go, I'm glad that's not me, then that's a trigger to have a conversation with somebody, because you don't know how they're feeling about that pain. Another good skill is to, if you hear, see, or know something that you know is not right for that person, that it's difficult for them, because it might not be a problem for you, but it's not about you, it's about them. So any of those two incidences, if something comes up, then say something. And the hardest part of it all is starting the conversation. And so my advice, if we're never doing something like this, is talk about what it is you've seen, heard, or known, and tell them that if that was you, you'd find it very difficult. So wanted to know if you could offer some help. If you just want to say, listen, do you want to talk about it? And so on. Because we don't know how long they've been suffering or going through this crisis, or where they are down their continuum of pain. And if this could potentially lead to thoughts of suicide. So, that's my advice, is that if you pick up on something, don't leave it a chance. I go to brunch every Friday with the same group of men. We've done it since COVID, because Boris Johnson told us it would be good for our mental health. We've never spoken about mental health, but I can tell you when the Plum Porter's on in our local, and I can tell you what bikes everyone is riding. But I've come home before now and been asked by my partner, how's so-and-so? And I've gone, oh, they're fine. And she said, oh, how do you know? And I said, well, I asked him, as you do, shake hands, how you doing? And he said he's fine. And she's then told me something that he's going through, because she knows from their partner. And I'm like, oh, wow, that's crazy. And I know that now. Now, I could miss this opportunity to help this person, because I might say something like, well, I'm seeing them next Friday, I'll talk to him about it then. Or I could go, well, if he wanted me to know, he would have told me. And if I miss it or dismiss it, I have missed an opportunity to help a fellow human being. And worst case scenario, I might not see them next Friday, because they might not be here.
Yeah.
Okay. Best case scenario, they're going through something, and I've not offered a helping hand. And that's really tragic. So we need to do better when listening out to people. We know from various data that most men who die by suicide reached out to at least one person before they died, and it was missed or dismissed. So I would not want to be that person who's done that. So hopefully that's answered the question.
Yeah, for sure. How does that statistic make you feel?
It's awful. It's absolutely awful. I mean, gosh, you think about those for men in particular, we don't get many opportunities to engage and save those lives, and so to miss that maybe that one opportunity, and often it's something really simple. Like, wouldn't it be amazing if all men who were thinking about suicide turned up to their friend's house and said, "Dude, I'm really sad. I've been thinking about suicide. Will you help me?" But they won't.
Yeah.
It's often something. It could be something like, well, this won't matter next week. Or they might say, everything's crap at work, but everything's crap at home. And you might think to yourself, well, yeah, the same for me, right? But you've missed that opportunity to speak to them about why it is for them. But often it's something really subtle, a change in something that's not right for them. They wouldn't say this or do this, or it's not quite right for their situation. It might be they always go out on a Thursday night, but tonight they say, not tonight, I'm not feeling it. And we miss it because we go, okay, mate, see you next week. Why have I not said, well, what's wrong? Why are you not feeling it? This is your thing. You always do this. Let's talk about that. And it's really, so that's really difficult for me to deal with that. And that's why we need greater awareness in men's spaces, greater, advocacy from our female counterparts, and better role models.
Your organization is called Tough to Talk. We've spoken a lot about talking and people reaching out and opening up. Why did you go with that name?
Because it does what it says on the tin. It is tough to talk, right? And so most men who find it tough to talk will just go, oh yeah. I mean, they won't do anything about it. They'll just go, yeah, I understand what you're saying. At best they'll go, yeah, it is tough. But that's it. So that's why we chose the name, because you know exactly what you're getting. But ultimately, this is what we're trying to prevent. We're trying to remove that toughness, shift those cultures, change the dialogue, and get men to want to open up, not just because they've been told to.
Do you think there's a difference there? Like, there's a lot of narrative around men need to talk more. In fact, that was the start of this podcast. It used to be called Shoot the Shit because I want men to talk. But the more that I get into this, hence the name's changed. Like, where's the line, like, between being told and like doing it yourself? What's missing?
Well, a lot of it, I know I keep talking about culture, but a lot of it is the environment. Are the environmentals right for this person to be able to speak up without fear of persecution, without fear of mockery, to be able to show that weakness, to be able to demonstrate vulnerability, and maybe talk about something that is the hardest thing that they are actually going through. So, that environment needs to be right for them to do that. The people in that space are critical because the people who are going to hear this message, we know that most people seek support in people who look like them. So those people all look very much the same in those men's spaces.
Yeah.
They all need to know that if any man speaks up, they will react in a way that will engage that person and get them talking, and it's that toxic masculinity in those spaces which often prevents those conversations. When somebody might say to somebody else, "Listen, I'm feeling a bit down at the moment," and is overheard by somebody else going, "Oh, what's the matter? Would you need a hug?" And then immediately closes the conversation down for everyone. The person who's offering help now feels like he doesn't want to put his head above the parapet. Okay, he maybe hasn't got a strong identity with his masculinity, and then the person who gets the help goes, "Oh no, listen, that's fine. Don't worry about it." It only takes a subtle comment like that just to close the whole conversation down. So everybody has to believe it. It has to be lived.
Yeah.
And then we can be strong and stoic and all those other great masculine things, okay, and open to having conversations.
Are you hopeful for the future, or do you think there's still a lot of work that needs to be done?
There is an incredible amount of work yet to still be done. But I am hopeful. While there's people like you and me and other organizations out there who are willing to bridge that gap between the help that is out there and the men who need it, whilst that's still happening, there's real hope, and as we get more and more role models in organizations and more people knowing that it's not, it's okay to talk, but actually knowing it is, and actually it is what you should do, so that I am hopeful that we will get there. And I'm thinking it's going to be a couple of generations, because those men who are gaining these skills now, and then going out to their families and then feeding it into their boys, and their boys are going to school and they're coming up into the workplace, and as they leave the school and the colleges and they go into the workplace, and the workplace is talking the right language, so it's just that fulfilling prophecy, if you like that, it'd be, so I think it'll take time, but I am hopeful.
Yeah, well, I've been doing this for 3 years. I'm absolutely amazed at how the conversation's changed over that period. I've interviewed people that have done this for 10, 20 years plus, and they were also in the trenches and very hopeful that it was going to change. And I do see elements and things popping up, but what you're saying is we need that full ecosystem that allows it to almost thrive rather than you feel still a little bit on the edge.
There's an echo chamber around people who are trying to do good. So all the support people, primary care, secondary care, the third sector, all those advocates that you see on social media for positive mental health and supporting men, we're all in this bubble echo chamber, and we're all talking the same language, and we're just bouncing off each other going, this needs to change, and everything else that's happening, right? But the people we really need to help are not in that space, and they're not coming to us. So we need, we're often seeing messages saying, "Oh, well, I'm seeing many more men sort of speaking up." Actually, we're seeing the same men talking the same things. What you're not seeing is the men we need to speak up doing it, and that's why we need to take that echo chamber and plonk it right over the top of them, and say it's okay. Okay, and it's okay now because we're all talking the same language and we're all doing it. You know.
I really like that. That's a really nice way of putting it. What in the men's space do you like right now, and what do you want to see more of?
Okay, so I I like that there's lots of places popping up that understand how men work. So, men in sheds, walk and talk, where you get men side by side doing something. It's a much better way of getting men to open up and engage.
Yeah.
I love all of that stuff. I'm loving that there's more and more content, on the web, about from real people talking about these things, people like yourself and so on, talking about those stuff. I'm loving that. What I'd like to see more of, though, is ways, and I don't know all the answers. I know how we're trying to do it.
Yeah.
Ways of bridging that gap to break the silence of men. How can we do that more and more? And so that's what I'd like to see more of.
Awesome. Steve, it's been an absolute pleasure. If people have liked what they've heard and they want to find out more, where's the best place to find you?
At tutortalk.com. Our website is easy to navigate, and if you want to drop us a message on there, you can do, and we'll make sure that we always get back to you. We do, everybody. And just a reminder that our charity supports anybody who identifies as a man and needs the support they help. That said, that we don't turn anybody away. We get plenty of women who come to our website and says, your content's appealed to me. Can I use it? Please do, because men and women are two sides of the same coin, and we've got to fix this problem together.